Good morning, I'm Taylor Wilson, and today is Tuesday, August 19th, 2025. This is USA Today's The Excerpt. Today, breaking down Zelensky's Washington visit, plus Texas Democrats return home after a redistricting standoff, and Trump threatens an executive order to end mail-in voting. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky visited Washington yesterday to meet with President Donald Trump and a number of European leaders to try and bring peace between Russia and Ukraine. I spoke with USA Today White House correspondent Francesca Chambers for a recap and a look at what might come next. Francesca, appreciate you hopping back on.
Thanks, Taylor.
So we know things were tense the last time Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky met with President Donald Trump in Washington. I just want to start by hearing if there was any sign of some of those past tensions, or was this a different energy this time around?
The energy was absolutely different, Taylor. And I was actually in the Oval Office with both presidents and had a chance to ask President Zelensky and President Trump a question yesterday. But notably, you didn't see one of those fights break out like you did the last time. Vice President J.D. Vance was in the room again, and he was involved in that spat the first time Zelensky came. But he sat quietly this time. He didn't say anything. And you could tell that President Zelensky was prepared for this conversation, that he also did not seem like he wanted to get in a fight with President Trump. Even at one point, Taylor, the same reporter who had critiqued his clothing before was in the room and said he looked fabulous. And Zelensky hit him back with the zinger, saying that he wore a different suit, but it looked like he might have worn the same one.
So, it seems like just when we talked late Friday night after that Putin meeting that maybe nothing concrete came out of this meeting yesterday. But what have we heard from Trump and Zelensky about what some of the discussion points were?
It's unclear, Taylor, exactly what came out of this meeting, too, other than to say that they made some progress on security guarantees, as well as a trilateral meeting between President Trump and President Zelensky and President Putin, as well as President Trump saying that there would be a bilateral meeting between President Putin and President Zelensky. We don't know when that meeting would be or if it'll take place on the same day as the trilateral that President Trump is envisioning. And importantly, when it comes to these security guarantees, what exactly it is that the United States would be willing to do as part of it.
So you mentioned you actually got a question into the Ukrainian leader, Francesca. What was that, and what did you hear from him?
Well, Taylor, I asked him what he needs to see from the United States in terms of security guarantees in order to be able to strike a deal to end the war. And he said it would involve military, intelligence, equipment, everything, he said. And then I asked President Trump if he'd be willing to offer NATO-like security guarantees, as his administration suggested over the weekend that he'd be willing to do in order to get the war ended. And Taylor, he wasn't ready to commit to that, but he did indicate that the United States would be involved in some way.
There were other European leaders here at these talks as well, Francesca. What role did they play? Of course, it wasn't just Zelensky and Trump in attendance. Did we have any sense from them?
Over the weekend, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that they weren't coming to make sure that President Zelensky wasn't bullied by President Trump. And President Zelensky did notably have an Oval Office meeting, as we discussed, with his delegation and President Trump and the U.S. delegation before they met with European leaders in the East Room. As far as what the European officials wanted out of it, what we heard from them in the room is that they'd still like to see a ceasefire in Russia's war with Ukraine. That mattered because President Trump said over the weekend that he didn't think that there needed to be a ceasefire, that he thought they should jump straight to a peace agreement. And he underscored his position on that matter yesterday, Taylor.
All right, well, in terms of what's next, you touched on this. Might the three of these leaders, Trump, Zelensky, and Putin, actually sit down in the same room in the coming days or weeks?
Taylor, we don't know when that would take place, although President Trump has said that he wants to see this war ended soon and he wants the meetings to take place as soon as possible. But in his Truth Social post, he didn't say when that meeting would take place.
All right, Francesca Chambers covers the White House for USA Today, joining us from Washington. Thanks, Francesca.
Thanks, Taylor.
Democrats in the Texas House of Representatives returned to the state capitol yesterday after leaving the state 2 weeks ago in protest of a Republican plan to redraw congressional maps to help the party gain seats in 2026. The protest temporarily blocked House Republicans from having a quorum to move the redistricting plan forward and drew national attention to President Trump's effort to avoid losing the Republican majority in Congress next year. The Texas House Democratic Caucus announced yesterday that its members refused to return to work until Republicans adjourned a special session in the state house last week, and California moved forward with a plan to redraw its own maps in favor of Democrats. President Trump said yesterday he would sign an executive order to abolish mail-in voting. That's even though states set election laws, and despite the popularity of mail-in voting. Out of 155 million votes cast in 2024, nearly 47 million were mailed in, according to the Election Assistance Commission. I spoke with USA Today White House correspondent Bart Jansen for more. As always, thanks for hopping on, Bart.
Thanks for having me.
So, Bart, just starting here, what is President Trump pushing for as it pertains to mail-in voting, and why does he say this is necessary?
Well, he's been upset for years with mail-in voting and also the idea of automatic vote counting machines. Basically, a lot of people track this back to his loss in the 2020 election and thinking that he had a lead on election day and that it evaporated as they counted the mail-in votes as they drifted in the few days after the election. So he's wanted to limit vote counting to election day, so you'd have a result that night. There wouldn't be any more of this waiting around for absentee ballots. He wants to get rid of mail-in ballots entirely because he says individuals can apply for more than one ballot per person. And he'd like to get rid of electronic vote counting. He thinks just counting paper ballots with watermarks would be safer. So he made a post with some all caps language on his Truth Social account. And then he was asked about it in the Oval Office while he was meeting with Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky. And he said that basically you can't trust mail-in ballots and that he wants to get rid of them.
Well, what do election security officials say about how secure mail-in voting really is?
Federal officials, including officials in his own first administration, said that voting has never been safer, never been more secure. There are all sorts of safeguards to make sure that votes are counted properly and that they are submitted properly from the right registered voters. And so this winds up at that point becoming sort of a partisan issue because Trump remains fiercely opposed. He says other Republicans ought to side with him and get smart. He says they're not going to be smart if they just cave into Democratic demands to continue or even perhaps expand, encourage people to do more absentee balloting. But there are people at the ACLU and at other legal experts, such as Rick Hasson at UCLA, who note, A, the president doesn't have any role in elections. He isn't part of the machinery. Elections law is governed by the states, and they set how many hours can you go to the polls? Which days do you go to the polls? If you want to have early voting or if you want to authorize mail-in voting. So states set those rules, and they, in the federal elections, they let the feds know how many people showed up and who they supported. In presidential elections, there's that extra step where voters are choosing electors, the electoral college that is what actually chooses the president. But throughout all of that, the president has no role whatsoever. He's a bystander, as are the other candidates for president. Federal authorities do monitor elections to make sure that there is not widespread fraud. And if there is, they can file charges to pursue people who cast votes fraudulently with criminal charges. But as we mentioned earlier, the election officials, the people that monitor elections, that try to track fraud, they say that we've never had more secure elections than they are right now.
Well, Bart, curiously, he invoked Russian leader Vladimir Putin on this issue, right? What did he say on this front?
During an interview on Friday with Sean Hannity on Fox News, he said that this subject had come up and Putin agreed that you couldn't have mail-in voting, that it's not trustworthy. And so he used that as sort of an endorsement saying that clearly he's right. Now, of course, there's a whole lot of people that think that Russia might still be an adversary of ours, and so might not be the best to listen to a foreign leader who might not have our best interests at heart. Some lawmakers were joshing that there's already election interference this year from Russia because Putin put his thumb on the scale against mail-in ballots.
Bart Jansen is a White House correspondent with USA Today. I appreciate the time as always, Bart.
Thanks for having me.
Hurricane Erin fluctuated in intensity yesterday and expanded in size as people fled North Carolina's Outer Banks, and forecasters warned of life-threatening rip currents and surf conditions along much of the East Coast. After losing some intensity over the weekend, Erin briefly strengthened back into a Category 4 storm with maximum sustained winds of 130 miles an hour. But by an 11 p.m. Eastern advisory from the National Hurricane Center, its winds had fallen to an estimated 125 miles per hour. The forecast points to Erin slowing down in forward speed and may continue to see fluctuating wind speeds over the next couple of days as it gradually turns northward along a track between the U.S. and Bermuda. It's the first hurricane to form this Atlantic season and the first to become a major storm. The system is expected to steer clear of the U.S., though forecasters warn it could bring dangerous surf and rip current conditions to the eastern seaboard. Thanks for listening to The Excerpt. You can get the podcast wherever you get your audio. And as always, you can email us at podcasts@usatoday.com. I'm Taylor Wilson. I'll be back tomorrow with more of The Excerpt from USA Today.